certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Hi everyone and welcome to Claremont in Conversation, The Verdict. I'm Natalie Bongiolo. In 2008, untested nail clippings from Ciara Glennon was sent to the UK. The laboratory was the Forensic Science Service, where a revolutionary procedure known as low copy number DNA profiling was being perfected by Dr. Jonathan Whitaker. By extracting DNA profiles from the tiniest of samples, he'd already helped police with breakthroughs in major cases. He'd given evidence in hundreds of trials around the world, and he became a star witness in the Claremont case. It was Dr. Whitaker's team who discovered a distinctive male profile from Ciara's fingernail samples, a eureka moment in a mystery spanning decades. In today's episode, Dr. Whitaker chats to Tim Clark about that moment and what followed.
When you got that result back, I mean, obviously it was the significant moment up to that point in the Claremont investigation. When you got that result and then made that call, did you appreciate how big it was going to be for the WA police?
No, not at all. I mean, I didn't even know what it meant, to be perfectly honest. So my focus was on what can I report, because I don't know if you know that the profile at what we call the high molecular weight end, that right hand side of the graphical form of the profile. Yep. Mr. Edwards has quite an unusual DNA marker, which in itself is relatively rare in the population. And that was a little marker which was just it was at the degrader part of the profile. I mean, it was definitely there, but it was, you know, quite small relative to the other parts. And so we were trying to make sure that when we reported back to the Western Australia Police how we dealt with that marker, because any searches of a database, for example, that will be really quite a powerful part of the DNA to help eliminate non-matches. Yep. So our main concern was to report back with confidence what we thought the male profile was, which is what we did. But with no inkling at that stage that it might be relevant to an offender, because
well, you just don't know, do you?
We felt very much that the issues of contamination from staff, for example, all those hurdles had got to be eliminated first, and that's what we would advocate. Mm-hmm. You try and position the significance of any result by eliminating other known sources of DNA. And I think even at that stage, I mean, I didn't know anything about Ciara Glennon. It could have matched a legitimate boyfriend, for example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At that point, for all I knew. Yeah. It was just a case of reporting it back, and then we know what happened as a result of that. Yeah,
and then, as you say, a few months later, after the Path West and WA Police had done their thing here, you get another call to say, well, we think we've matched it to another offence, and these are the samples from that offence, and would you mind awfully doing your stuff again to see if our match matches your match?
Yes. Well, I think that's really important because from my perspective, just sitting here in my little bubble, the fact that it has matched to another type of sexual offence with a similar MO, then that's when it sort of really started to take on significance for me, because I've working so many years, you don't get those sort of coincidences just by chance.
No, exactly, and that was the ultimate argument that Miss Barbagallo made was, well, what are the chances that A, these two offences just could be randomly matched, and B, if they were contaminated, then what are the chances of two so similar crimes in similar times just happening to come into contact in a lab?
And that's what Justice Hall said in his judgment as well, didn't he? He
Correct.
said, "I've taken, the fact that this sample should have been contaminated by samples from another victim who's been, in similar circumstances. He didn't, but he said, didn't he? I've taken that into account."
Yeah. And then, fast forward all those years, I suppose, like a lot of people, you got a call out of the blue from someone from the DPP or the WA police saying, "We might need you to give evidence because this is what it all means."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, that came down the line when. So where would we have been when they got the sample from the Sprite bottle, and then took a reference sample from him? That's when what we would call the evaluative phase started.
Yep.
So up until that, we would make distinction between generating a profile and then using that profile to try and find a person, which was all prior to his arrest. And then having found him, the emphasis of the DNA is all about, how did his DNA get there, and what's the chances of this being his DNA rather than somebody else's? And so, at that time of arrest, that's when we switch gears and move into that sort of reporting phase.
Yeah, and being half a world away, you probably didn't realise, or maybe you did, the attention and interest of the case in general, but then in particular when Edwards was arrested and charged, and it then came to light a little bit later that there was this DNA match. I mean, were you keenly following it from afar, or I suppose you're a busy man and you've got other things to do, but.
Well, I was kept informed. I mean, the police officer I was most in touch with was Jim Stanbury. So I got a very good relationship with Jim, and he brought the samples over along with George Patton. And unfortunately, Jim, for whatever reason, was taken off the task force, but he very much kept an interest in what was going on, and he kept me informed of what was happening. So that was nice. But I mean, there's so much out there on the internet. Easy to find out.
Yeah. And then you get to the trial phase, and obviously knowing that you're going to be a witness, I guess you've got to be across every eventuality, both from your side and what might be said against you, I suppose. But I mean, from the way you gave evidence, you were always, it seemed to me, confident certainly in the process that you'd undertaken. But then you were asked about other things that had happened at the Pathwest lab and contaminations, and ultimately you came to the conclusion that it was, even though there were those contamination events, they were very rare and absolutely had nothing to do with these fingernail samples that you'd been asked to test.
Yeah. So the key to that is evaluating trying to ask the question or answer the question, how did the DNA get there? When contamination is run as a defence, although I think we all accepted that that's what it was, although it wasn't explicitly stated by the defence, it seems to me, that it's all about the context of that case and that case's samples and what happened to those case samples, which is, why all that continuity evidence was brought to the fore. And it just needed that emphasis that, the contamination by staff is irrelevant because, in essence, you've identified that it's come from the staff member, and therefore it's got, although identifying those things is useful for the lab to improve its quality through corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again, it doesn't impact on the fundamental question, well, has contamination happened in this case between these samples? And I think that's the message that we had to bring home, that all this other stuff about staff contamination at Pathwest and in any other lab, in our own lab we used to get it, but the difference is that you you've detected it, and you can show how it might have got there. But for these samples in this case, that's why we had to go down that line of, well, have these samples ever come into close proximity to each other? Has there ever been this mechanism? Has there ever been an opportunity? And reading the judgment, I'm quite pleased that message seems to have been clearly stated, because Justice Hall actually makes reference to that.
Yeah.
On a number of occasions.
Yeah, he basically said it was inconceivable how it could have happened, and that left only one other rational scenario, which is the one that he accepted, that Ciara scratched him, and that's how it got there. Reading judgments like that, and Justice Hall would use words personally about yourself, including sort of cogent and compelling. That must give you a certain amount, or a lot of professional satisfaction, knowing that the job that you've been asked to do by the West Australian Police and the DPP, you seem to have succeeded in.
Yeah, definitely. I don't might say that unashamedly, but I mean, we spent that 20, 30 years trying to develop that, and I know the difference. Very much the difference was that it was a judge-only case, and often with scientific issues, as I'm sure you're aware, it's trying to convey those complex issues in simple terms, mainly to a jury, and that sort of never left me, even though there was just a judge there, because there was plenty of people in the audience, and particularly for the family, I felt it was important that they understood what the way of thinking was, and the process that we use, this idea of having to consider the evidence with alternative explanations for it, what we term propositions, and that enabled you to rank how likely the evidence was given those alternatives. So we didn't really develop how the evidence was going to present it so much until, I would say, the day before I gave evidence.
Oh, wow.
We had lots of conferences with Carmel, and we just sort of said, in order to get what this evidence means out there, we have to follow this framework that was there and referenced and prescribed by the scientific community. This idea of assessing the probability of the evidence given these alternatives, because otherwise what you end up with is the defence say, well, is contamination possible? And the scientists would often say yes, and that's the end of it. But the relevant question is how likely is it to get the evidence if one of two alternatives was true, that she'd scratched him or she'd scratched somebody else. And it's like saying, could I win the lottery? And you say, well, yes. I could, but it's not very likely. It's more likely that I won't win. And that's why it's important for a scientist to be, in my mind, involved with making sure that they're asked the right questions, so that you can give the right answer, or the most informative answer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, Carmel was a star. She got it, and we just went from there.
Yeah. And you mentioned the family there, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but Ciara's dad, Dennis, gave a press conference, very emotional press conference at the end of last week, and he mentioned several people by name, you being one of them. That must even maybe that outranks a judge. That when the closest family member of a victim thanks you for helping bring them some resolution.
I did see that. I caught that, and I found that really emotional myself, really, because we don't. You don't often get to see that impact on the family much at all. You give your evidence, and often you never get the opportunity to speak to them or understand what this result means to them. And I mean, you never can really, can you? Because you can never put yourself in their shoes. But after I'd given evidence, I had a brief chat with Mr. Glennon at court, which was nice, and just sort of privately. And then, to hear him say that for the team and the fact that, again, our work all those years ago had borne fruit this number of years down the line was, it was heartening. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you, Doctor. As I say, really appreciate your time. Hope you get to come back to Perth at some stage, maybe under slightly less stressful circumstances. All the best.
All right.
Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Dr. Whitaker for the early morning chat from the UK. We'll be back next week with more special guests, including the Perth detective who launched the Claremont serial killer investigation and the former WA Police Commissioner who was the top cop when Edwards was arrested and charged. Also, if you have any questions still unanswered, drop us an email to claremontpodcast@wanews.com.au and we'll aim next week for a bonus episode to clarify or delve into any of those outstanding questions you may have. And of course, after that, we'll be back with you on the 23rd of December for the sentencing of Edwards. Hope to have your company next week for Claremont in Conversation, The Verdict. Until then.
This podcast is hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au. And if local news delivered differently appeals to you, tune into WA's newest morning show, The West Live with Jenna Clark. It's talkback radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.